Luxury vehicles depreciate 43% in value the moment they leave the dealership lot, but most drivers never use that information against the system that created it. 67% of bulletproof luxury SUVs sitting on dealer floors past 90 days sell below wholesale value. Dealers know this. That is exactly why they never advertise how long inventory has been sitting. There are 5 SUVs rotting on lots, ignored by new model chasers, priced at fractions of their original engineering cost. 5 luxury SUVs built to outlast everything on the road today. Today I am exposing all 5. Let's dive in. Number 5. The 2013 to 2015 Mercedes-Benz M-Class. When the average consumer sees a depreciated 10-year-old Mercedes-Benz sitting on a used car lot for $14,000, they instinctively run the other way. The general consensus is that a used German luxury vehicle is nothing more than a financial black hole waiting to drain your bank account with electrical failures and catastrophic engine-out repairs. Because of this widespread fear, these vehicles suffer from an incredibly steep depreciation curve. The original owner paid $65,000, and now the dealer can barely give it away. If you know exactly which engine code to look for, you can use that public fear to secure an absolute mechanical fortress. You want the 3rd generation M-Class, specifically the ML350 model, produced between 2013 and 2015. The secret to this specific vehicle is the engine sitting under the hood. It is the naturally aspirated 3.5-liter V6, known internally as the M276. Prior to this generation, Mercedes used an engine called the M272. That older engine was notorious for a catastrophic balance shaft gear failure. The metal gears would wear down prematurely, throwing off the engine timing and requiring a mechanic to remove the entire engine from the vehicle to fix it. Mercedes engineers learned from their massive financial mistake and completely redesigned the block for the M276. They changed the internal angle of the cylinders to exactly 60 degrees. Because of this precise physical geometry, the engine is inherently perfectly balanced and no longer requires a fragile counter-rotating balance shaft. They removed the weakest link from the architecture entirely. Furthermore, this engine does not use any high-stress turbochargers or superchargers. It is a traditional, atmospheric engine that provides smooth, linear power. When bolted to the 7-speed automatic transmission, known as the 7G-Tronic Plus, the powertrain is widely considered by independent mechanics to be one of the most reliable setups Mercedes has ever engineered. You must, however, perform routine fluid changes on this transmission every 40,000 miles. If you neglect the fluid, the internal conductor plate will short out, resulting in a $1,200 repair. Buying a reliable engine is only half the battle. You must explicitly avoid the optional air suspension system. Mercedes offered an upgrade called Airmatic, which replaced the traditional steel coil springs with rubber air bladders. While it provides a cloud-like ride, the rubber bladders inevitably dry rot, crack, and leak over time. When a leak occurs, the electric air compressor continues to run endlessly trying to keep the car level until it completely melts its internal wiring and burns itself out. Replacing the Airmatic struts, the valve block, and the compressor will cost you $3,500. You must physically look behind the front wheels before you buy the car and ensure it has traditional, heavy-duty steel springs. Here is something most buyers never consider when evaluating the ML350. The interior packaging of this generation is genuinely exceptional for the price point you are paying on the used market. The second row folds completely flat, creating a load floor that rivals dedicated cargo vans. The panoramic sunroof that spans both the first and second row seating areas fills the cabin with light that makes the interior feel significantly more expensive than the asking price suggests. And the Command infotainment system, while not as intuitive as a modern touchscreen, is reliable in a way that modern touchscreen systems are not. It uses a physical controller that does not fail. The screen behind it does not develop dead zones. These are the small details that matter when you own a vehicle past 100,000 miles, and the warranty is a distant memory. The suspension geometry on the passive spring ML350 is also worth understanding before purchase. The multi-link front and rear suspension uses large rubber bushings at every pivot point. These bushings absorb the constant micro-impacts of daily driving and degrade gradually over time, rather than failing suddenly. When they wear, the car develops a slight vagueness in steering response and a mild looseness over sharp bumps. A full suspension bushing refresh on this generation runs about $1,200 to $1,800 at an independent shop, and returns the handling to factory precision completely. It is a one-time investment that transforms a tired, high-mileage example into something that drives with the composure of a much newer vehicle. The brake system on the ML350 is sized for a vehicle significantly heavier than this one. The front rotors are large, the calipers are robust, and the brake bias calibration is conservative rather than aggressive. This means the brakes last longer than you would expect, and the rotors resist the warping that plagues smaller, more lightly constructed vehicles in the same segment. Budget one set of pads and rotors every 50,000 miles and consider the brake system a non-issue. The only consistent flaw with this specific generation involves the blind spot monitoring sensors. The radar sensors are mounted inside the rear bumper cover, directly behind the rear tires. Over years of driving in the rain, water and road salt are thrown directly onto the sensor housings. The moisture penetrates the plastic casing, causing the internal circuit boards to corrode and fail. When they fail, the dashboard will display a continuous error message. Replacing the sensors costs roughly $800, but it does not affect the drivability of the vehicle. Securing a reliable German SUV requires navigating complex option codes, but the next vehicle on our list is a depreciated crossover that completely abandoned a horrific timing chain nightmare for a single bulletproof setup. Number 4, the 2009 to 2012 Audi Q5. The reputation of used Audi vehicles is generally horrific. For the better part of a decade, Audi built their entire corporate reputation on a 2.0-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine known as the EA888. That specific 4-cylinder engine was globally famous for aggressively burning oil because the factory piston rings were designed too thin. Even worse, it violently shattered its own plastic timing chain guides due to a defective hydraulic tensioner, causing the pistons to smash into the valves and destroying the engine entirely. When consumers think of a used Audi Q5, they immediately think of complete engine replacement. This widespread terror is exactly why you can find the early generation Q5 models rotting on used car lots for roughly $10,000. The public assumes every single one of them is broken. The public is entirely wrong. You must completely ignore the 4-cylinder models and specifically hunt for the early Q5 equipped with the naturally aspirated 3.2-liter FSI V6 engine. This specific powertrain was only offered during the first few years of the first generation, from 2009 until 2012. It completely predates the complex supercharged engines that replaced it and completely avoids the oil consumption disaster of the turbo 4-cylinder. The 3.2-liter V6 is an incredibly stout, heavy-duty engine block. It utilizes a robust timing chain system located at the rear of the engine, right against the firewall. Unlike the smaller engines, this timing chain actually lasts the life of the vehicle if you perform consistent synthetic oil changes. It produces 270 horsepower and is bolted to a traditional 6-speed automatic transmission manufactured by ZF. This era of Audi still utilized the legendary true mechanical Torsen center differential for the Quattro all-wheel drive system. It does not use fragile electronic clutch packs. The Torsen system mechanically binds the front and rear axles, meaning the vehicle is an absolute tank in deep snow and adverse weather conditions. What most buyers do not appreciate about the Torsen differential is how fundamentally different it is from the electronically controlled torque vectoring systems that replaced it in later generations. There is no clutch pack to overheat. There is no control module that can fail and leave you with front-wheel drive on an icy mountain road. The Torsen unit is a mechanical worm gear assembly that responds to torque demand instantaneously and proportionally without any electronic input whatsoever. It simply works, always, at any temperature, under any load. This is the kind of engineering that the word bulletproof was invented to describe. The interior of the first generation Q5 is worth examining beyond the obvious leather and wood trim. The seat structure uses a foam density that holds its shape over high mileage, far better than most competitors from this era. The door panels are assembled with a tightness that prevents the rattling and creaking that develops in most vehicles past 100,000 miles. The HVAC system, which is often an afterthought in vehicles at this price point on the used market, is a dual-zone unit with independent temperature control and a blower motor that rarely fails even on very high mileage examples. Because this engine utilizes direct fuel injection, it does suffer from one specific, highly documented maintenance requirement. Direct injection sprays high-pressure fuel directly into the combustion chamber, entirely bypassing the intake valves. Over 50,000 miles, crankcase oil vapors from the ventilation system bake onto the dry intake valves, creating a thick, hard layer of carbon soot. This carbon buildup restricts airflow into the cylinders, causing the engine to idle roughly, hesitate during cold starts, and lose fuel economy. To fix this, you must have an independent mechanic perform a service called walnut blasting. The mechanic removes the intake manifold and uses a specialized vacuum tool to blast crushed walnut shells at high pressure directly into the intake ports. The abrasive shells physically scrape the carbon off the metal valves without damaging the aluminum engine block. This service costs roughly $600 and only needs to be done once every 60,000 miles to restore the engine to factory performance. You must also check the water pump housing on the front of the engine, as the plastic weeping holes tend to slowly leak coolant as the vehicle crosses 100,000 miles. Additionally, Audi uses a complex multi-link front suspension. The heavy rubber bushings in the upper control arms eventually tear, causing a dull clunking noise over speed bumps. Replacing the front control arms costs about $800. Once the carbon is cleaned and the suspension is refreshed, This depreciated German crossover provides a beautiful, quiet, leather-lined commute for a fraction of its original $50,000 sticker price. Avoiding turbochargers saves you thousands of dollars in repairs. But the next vehicle is a legendary Japanese luxury tank that dealerships literally cannot give away because of a highly controversial interior design choice. Number 3. The 2014 to 2015 Acura MDX. Acura is the luxury division of Honda, which means it carries the genetic foundation of absolute reliability. The MDX is a spacious 3-row family SUV that originally sold for over $50,000. Today, you can easily find the third-generation models sitting abandoned on dealership lots for roughly $14,000. The reason these highly capable vehicles depreciated so aggressively is entirely cosmetic. When Acura redesigned the MDX for the 2014 model year, they introduced a highly controversial dual-screen infotainment system in the center console. Automotive journalists and consumers universally hated the dashboard layout. It was confusing to navigate, the touch responses on the lower screen were slightly delayed, and it felt remarkably unintuitive compared to the simple, physical buttons of the previous generation. Because the interior technology received terrible reviews, the demand for the vehicle plummeted on the used market. Their technological frustration is your absolute financial gain. Beneath the confusing dashboard screens lies one of the greatest powertrains ever engineered in the modern automotive era. You are looking specifically for the 2014 or 2015 model year. You must isolate your search to these exact 2 years because they represent a very specific mechanical sweet spot. During these 2 years, Acura utilized the legendary 3.5-liter J-Series V6 engine and bolted it directly to a proven heavy-duty 6-speed automatic transmission. In 2016, Acura switched to a highly problematic 9-speed automatic transmission manufactured by ZF. That 9-speed was notorious for jerky shifts, software failures, and catastrophic highway hesitations. By isolating your search to the first 2 years of the generation, you get the modern body style combined with the bulletproof older transmission. The J-Series engine is famous for reaching 300,000 miles without breaking a sweat, but it harbors a controversial fuel-saving technology called variable cylinder management. When cruising on the highway, the computer disables 3 of the 6 cylinders. Over time, the dead cylinders cool down, allowing oil to slip past the piston rings and foul the spark plugs. The system also creates an engine imbalance, which wears out the expensive active engine mounts. You can permanently bypass this system by installing a simple $80 electronic device called a VCM muzzler, which tricks the computer into running on all 6 cylinders permanently. Furthermore, this engine uses a rubber timing belt instead of a metal timing chain. Because it is an interference engine, if that rubber belt snaps, the internal engine valves will violently collide with the pistons, destroying the cylinder head entirely. You must demand service records proving the timing belt, the water pump, and the hydraulic tensioner were replaced at the 100,000-mile mark. If the dealer cannot provide the paperwork, you must negotiate $800 off the asking price and have the service done immediately by an independent Honda specialist. What buyers consistently overlook on this generation MDX is the structural engineering underneath the body panels. The unibody construction uses ultra-high-strength steel in the A pillars and B pillars at a gauge thickness that was not required by regulation, but was specified by Acura's engineering team as an internal standard. The result is a cabin that is extraordinarily rigid. This rigidity does 2 things simultaneously. It makes the vehicle safer in an impact, and it prevents the body flex that causes interior rattles, door misalignment, and squeaking dashboard panels on high-mileage vehicles. You can buy an MDX with 180,000 miles on it and close the door to the same solid, vault-like sound it made the day it left the factory. The 3-row seating configuration in this generation deserves specific attention. The second row slides forward on a track to allow third-row access without requiring passengers to perform gymnastics. The mechanism is a single-lever operation that has no documented failure rate worth discussing. The third row itself accommodates adults up to 6 feet tall, with more headroom than any competitor in this segment from the same era. For families who actually use the third row, this is a genuine differentiator that adds real daily use value to an already compelling purchase. This era of MDX also features the super handling all-wheel drive system. It uses electromagnetic clutch packs in the rear differential to actively overdrive the outside rear wheel while cornering, which completely eliminates understeer. It makes this massive, heavy family hauler handle like a tight sports sedan. The rear differential requires a specific dual-pump fluid change every 30,000 miles. The fluid costs $30, but changing it is crucial to the survival of the complex all-wheel drive clutches. Ignoring terrible dashboard screens saves you thousands of dollars, but the next vehicle on our list is the ultimate status symbol that secretly borrowed its internal engine architecture from a company renowned for unbreakable reliability. Number 2. The 2014 to 2018 BMW X5. The idea of buying a 10-year-old, out-of-warranty BMW X5 is usually considered absolute financial suicide. The internet is flooded with legitimate horror stories of used BMW SUVs that require $5,000 engine rebuilds, endless electrical diagnostics, and transmission replacements. Dealerships know that regular buyers are terrified of the brand, which is exactly why these original $70,000 luxury cruisers languish on the backlots for under $18,000. The horror stories are entirely valid, but they are almost exclusively aimed at the V8 models. The BMW twin-turbo V8 engine, known as the N63, is a thermal nightmare. Engineers place the turbochargers directly inside the valley of the engine block. This Hot V design aggressively destroys its own valve stem seals, melts internal cooling lines, and causes the engine to consume massive amounts of oil. You must completely avoid any X5 with the 50i badge on the tailgate. Instead, you are going to aggressively hunt for the F15 Generation X5 bearing the xDrive 35i badge. This specific badge means the massive vehicle is powered by the 3.0-liter turbocharged inline-6 engine, known internally as the N55. The N55 engine is a structural masterpiece. It utilizes a highly robust open-deck aluminum engine block and a single twin-scroll turbocharger. It completely resolved the terrifying high-pressure fuel pump and piezoelectric injector failures that plagued the older BMW inline-6 engines. It is so inherently reliable and over-engineered that Toyota literally partnered with BMW to use a slightly evolved version of this exact inline-6 architecture for their modern super sports car. When Toyota trusts an engine block for their flagship sports car, you know it is built to survive. The engine is mated to the ZF 8-speed automatic transmission, which is widely recognized as the single best automatic transmission currently produced in the automotive industry. It shifts with imperceptible smoothness, optimizes fuel economy, and has an incredibly low internal failure rate provided you change the fluid every 60,000 miles. There is something else about the F15 X5 that the depreciation numbers do not communicate. The driving dynamics of this generation are genuinely, unexpectedly excellent for a vehicle of its size and weight. The adaptive suspension, when functioning correctly, transforms the character of the vehicle completely between its comfort and sport settings. In comfort mode, it absorbs road imperfections with a passivity that feels engineered for someone who values peace above everything. In sport mode, the suspension firms, the steering weights up, and the 306 horsepower inline-6 pulls with a directness that reminds you this chassis was engineered by people who drive fast for pleasure, not just profession. The 8-speed ZF transmission deserves more attention than it typically receives in ownership discussions. This unit is shared across BMW, Rolls-Royce, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Aston Martin applications. The engineering investment that ZF made in this transmission is reflected in its internal architecture. The clutch pack tolerances are tighter than the application strictly requires. The solenoid quality is above what the price point demands. The hydraulic circuit is sealed against the kind of contamination that destroys lesser units. Buy one with documented fluid changes and it will outlast the rest of the vehicle around it. The xDrive all-wheel drive system in this generation uses a transfer case that splits torque between the front and rear axles electronically, but with a mechanical architecture robust enough to handle the full engine output without stress. The rear bias calibration means the X5 behaves with a rear-wheel drive character under normal conditions and only distributes power forward when traction demands it. This rear-biased behavior reduces wear on the front drivetrain components and gives the handling a balance that purely front-biased systems cannot replicate. While the core of the engine block and the transmission are bulletproof, it is still a German luxury vehicle. This means the plastic accessories bolted to the outside of the engine will eventually fail due to extreme underhood temperatures. The most critical failure point is the electric water pump. Instead of a traditional belt-driven pump, BMW uses a high-flow electric pump to precisely manage engine temperatures. The plastic impeller eventually cracks, or the internal circuit board on the pump inevitably shorts out around 80,000 miles. When it dies, the engine will overheat very quickly. Replacing the electric water pump and the plastic thermostat housing costs roughly $900. You must also obsessively monitor the oil filter housing gasket. The rubber gasket sits at the top front of the engine and eventually becomes brittle from thermal cycling. It begins to slowly leak oil down the front of the block. If ignored, the leaking oil drips directly onto the main serpentine belt. The rubber belt degrades, slips off the pulleys, and the engine can actually suck the shredded belt through the front main crankshaft seal directly into the oil pan. The shredded belt clogs the oil pickup tube and completely destroys the engine. Fixing the gasket early costs about $400 and completely prevents the catastrophe. You should also plan to replace the plastic charge pipe that routes pressurized air from the turbocharger to the engine. The factory plastic pipe becomes brittle and cracks under heavy boost, An aftermarket aluminum charge pipe costs $200 and permanently solves the issue. Replacing plastic cooling parts is a minor annoyance for the incredible level of driving dynamics you receive. But our absolute #1 vehicle is a rolling Swedish vault that hides an engine so reliable it is frequently used in commercial marine applications. Number 1, the 2007 to 2014 Volvo XC90. When you want absolute, uncompromising safety in a cabin built with materials designed to outlast a nuclear winter, you look at the first generation Volvo XC90. This vehicle was in production for an incredibly long 12 years without a major exterior redesign. Because it looked virtually identical from 2003 all the way to 2014, the design felt exceptionally stale to the general public, causing resale prices to plummet. You can easily find pristine, garage-kept examples on the used market today for $6,000 to $8,000. It is the ultimate automotive bargain, but you must strictly avoid the early transmission disasters. From 2003 until 2006, Volvo offered a twin-turbo inline-6 engine known as the T6. Because the engine bay was designed to be exceptionally narrow to maximize frontal crash crumple zones, Volvo had to source an incredibly compact 4-speed automatic transmission from General Motors to physically fit inside the engine bay. That specific transmission was comically weak and violently shattered under the torque output of the twin turbos. You must ignore those early years entirely and specifically target the models produced from 2007 onward, equipped exclusively with the naturally aspirated 3.2-liter inline-6 engine. This specific engine is a triumph of packaging and durability. To fit a long inline-6 engine sideways across the engine bay, Volvo and Ford engineers had to get highly creative. They removed all of the traditional belt-driven accessories from the front of the engine. The alternator, the air conditioning compressor, and the power steering pump were relocated above the transmission and are driven by a complex set of internal gears running off the back of the crankshaft. This complex system is called the rear engine accessory drive. Because of this brilliant engineering, the engine block is incredibly compact and completely devoid of traditional timing belts. It uses a heavy-duty timing chain located deep inside the block that never requires maintenance. The 3.2-liter engine is so inherently reliable, smooth, and structurally robust that it is legendary within the independent mechanic community. It effortlessly surpasses 400,000 miles with nothing but basic synthetic oil changes. Before we get into the weak points, let us talk about what the XC90 represents at the price you're paying for it on the used market in 2026. $6,000 to $8,000 buys you a vehicle that was originally engineered to a safety specification that was not required by any regulatory body in any market. Volvo set their own standards. Their internal requirement was that the XC90 would protect its occupants in a collision with a vehicle significantly heavier than itself, traveling at significantly higher speed than any regulation demanded they account for. The boron steel safety cage that surrounds the occupant compartment is not a marketing claim. It is a measurable material specification that independent crash researchers have validated repeatedly in the years since this vehicle was introduced. The seating position in the XC90 is worth discussing because it contributes directly to the long-term ownership experience. The driver sits high enough to have genuine visibility over the surrounding traffic, but low enough that the center of gravity remains controlled through corners. The seat cushion depth accommodates thigh support for drivers between 5'4" and 6'3" without adjustment. The lumbar support is a manually adjustable inflatable bladder rather than an electric motor, which means it has no failure mode that strands you with inadequate back support on a long drive. These are the engineering decisions that make a 12-year-old vehicle feel considered rather than dated. The cargo area behind the third row is genuinely usable rather than merely present. When the third row folds, the floor is completely flat with no intrusion from the folding mechanism. The load lip height is low enough that heavy items can be slid in without lifting. The cargo rails in the floor accept the factory accessory load stops that can be repositioned without tools. For families who actually use the cargo area for actual cargo, rather than as a backdrop for automotive journalism photographs, these details matter every week. The climate control system in the XC90 from this era uses a physical rotary control interface that requires zero screen interaction during operation. You set the temperature with a dial. You set the fan speed with a dial. You direct the airflow with a dial. You do this without taking your eyes off the road. In an era of touchscreen climate control that requires 3 menu levels to change the temperature, this is not a feature that deserves to be called dated. It deserves to be called correct. The only mechanical quirk to watch out for is the internal bearings on that rear engine accessory drive gear system. Over 150,000 miles, the bearings supporting the gears can begin to wear out. you will hear a distinct, high-pitched whining noise that fluctuates perfectly with engine RPM, sounding somewhat like a mechanical supercharger. It takes a specialized mechanic to rebuild the gear bearings, which can cost around $1,000, but it is a one-time repair for the entire lifespan of the vehicle. You must also perform regular maintenance on the positive crankcase ventilation system. The oil trap box separates oil vapors from the air returning to the intake manifold. If you use cheap conventional oil, the trap clogs with thick sludge. A clogged trap forces air pressure to build up inside the engine case, which will eventually blow out the fragile camshaft seals and cause a massive oil leak down the back of the engine. Replacing the oil trap box is a simple $200 service that completely protects the engine seals from rupturing. Beyond the drivetrain, the XC90 rewards its owners with a long-term cost of ownership profile that is genuinely difficult to find in any vehicle that started life at this price point. The front brake rotors are sized generously for the vehicle's weight and resist the warping that plagues underbaked rotors on heavier crossovers. A quality set of pads and rotors runs about $350 for all four corners at an independent shop. The front wheel bearings are press-fit hub assemblies that last reliably to 150,000 miles on vehicles that are not driven aggressively through rough terrain. Replacement runs about $250 per corner. The electrical system, which is the component that destroys the ownership experience on most European vehicles of this era, is straightforward on the XC90 to a degree that surprises mechanics who encounter it for the first time. Volvo used sealed connectors at every junction point in the harness. The body control module communicates over a CAN bus network, but with a conservative architecture that does not cascade failures across multiple systems the way German competitors do. A fault in the parking sensor system is a fault in the parking sensor system. It does not also disable the climate control and throw the transmission into limp mode. The systems are isolated from each other in a way that makes diagnosis logical and repair costs predictable. The interior of the XC90 features orthopedic seats that are widely considered some of the most comfortable ever put into a production vehicle. The heavy boron steel safety cage provides a level of structural crash protection that rivals modern SUVs built a decade later. By spending $8,000 on a well-maintained 3.2-liter model, you are securing a depreciated Swedish tank that will effortlessly protect your family for the next decade without bankrupting you in the service lane. If this video just saved you from buying a fragile money pit luxury SUV or armed you with the exact engine codes you need to hunt for a masterpiece, hit that subscribe button right now, and do not forget to like this video. We are building a massive community of drivers who absolutely refuse to be scammed by the automotive industry.